Hello, everybody. I'm trying to provide some structure for us to provide lessons learned and also how we're going to communicate what an operating model is. So what I'm going to share with you is some work on an operating model from 2012. And what's going to be valuable about this is that we have different people who have different perspectives. Brian was on this team, didn't really participate in the development of this, but definitely on the rollout or parts of it. Uh, Dave was a recipient of the service, and I've got a variety of evidence of running it. So what I want to do is just share some prerequisites before. So what I'm going to do is this is exactly, I didn't alter anything from 2012. And so moving on to this, every person on the team gave their role, and I tried to define roles. So I prefer one-word roles. But Brian's role was organizational therapist. I had another role. His role, Dan's role was word assassin. So I had different individual roles on the team, and it was very difficult for people to execute or play in their roles. But we'll share those lessons learned later. We'd worked on creating discipline. How are we going to execute? So this is the year after the first conference, and we have a lot of interest. So uh, I'm looking at this over a 4-year window of time. I'd already had the conversation in noun versus verb idea, and I'd socialized it within our core team and unit, but not all the way out throughout Forrester. I'm presenting only material from 2012 to provide us an anchor. Obviously, this predates 2017. What can we learn from SES? But I thought with this structure, we'll have a foundation of what resonates with us and what was implemented for the SES, and then what we're trying to implement now. I think the more that we understand what these things are, the better off we're going to understand the difference between prototype, um, uh, production stage, and scale stage. We're just still jumping way too much into scale type thinking. And I do not want to version control this work product until we understand the details of what's in it. All right. I'm going to do my part in this video to share or make some connections. But here's the theme: building a new approach. The whole approach was way back when. I didn't call it experience. The whole idea is how do we make ongoing valuable relationships. So the theme at the time was ongoing valuable relationships. And the metaphor that we used, so Tim, I hope you see a lot of need for graphics to convey these ideas, because this is something that's been with me for, over 10 years that I need help from. And this is sort of the creative process of getting out the core idea, the emotive idea, like we talked about today. But really what this is basically centering on the idea of a stool. And I used to talk about this just by showing a stool, and that wasn't really helpful. But really, in order for us to create a valuable relationship with a client, and this is again through the lens of Forrester, these are the elements that we have to do. We have to know, we have to work backwards and meet client expectations. So we have to know what clients need from us in terms of research, and then what value do they place on research. Because we have to know those two things. And my observation was people on our team weren't asking a lot of those kinds of questions. And I think Forrester in general aren't asking these questions. All right, that's sort of the thing that holds it all together. Now, what we have to do is we have to break down our work, and we broke down our work into 3 buckets. There's the IP development process, and we have to be collaborative, and we have to have a holistic method to do it. Then there are forms or output forms of IP delivery. Um, this was one of the things that we had just so much difficulty really understanding, is if you don't spend the time to think about how you're going to organize or present the information, you get caught up around the axle in the IP to development process. Then it's, do we have delivery forms that we can configure based on client engagement? And you can see here, look, we even had the outcome wheel. So the outcome wheel already existed way back then, and we use that as a design point. So I've got a lot of empathy for how challenging that, how simple and how challenging that is. So the idea is, how do we make sure all of this fits together? Because at the end of the day, client expectations are what matters. And I think in this particular setting, we can talk to Dave about what his experiences were in working with Forrester and particularly our team. But then, what is it like inside, and what the gaps are between a customer and what it's like to be on the individual team, and it's really fascinating. Okay, so then what we did is just broke it down. So these are our asks, right? So what we're saying is, look, we need to have these roles, blah, 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 blah. So this is stuff that I communicated internally. And of course, who is my audience for this? My audience for this is Brad, who is the business unit executive that I reported to. And then he and I were completely aligned. So really it was him and I working on this together, really, really collaboratively, lots of iterations and figuring out what our message was so that we could communicate it to Charles Rutstein, who is the COO, and George. And and then also know full well what questions they're going to ask us, so that we have, we're ready for it. So that's what we're doing. We were asking what our headcount requests are going to be. Okay. So then another one would be, what kind of investments do we need to justify some of the other spending that we've got? So we need to create, in order for us to execute this, we need to have more collaborative tools, like be able to use video. And as you guys know, there's a big learning curve with using video. We need to have more streamlined social surveying tools. We need to be able to bring people on board who can create outputs that we're generating from these workshops, these experiential workshops that we ran. So I know how hard it is to extract this information out, and why you have to follow a structure for it, or else you don't get the outputs. So these were all known things. We didn't get funding on a lot of these things because we weren't able to show examples. We didn't create C-slides for a lot of these things. Delivery. What we need to do is we need this particular pitch. So we gave this pitch and we talked about what that meant. George loved it. He said, talk to our research production team. And they literally told us we could do none of these things, that we have one platform. So they went to George and said, what we're asking for is a completely new investment in a whole new platform, which wasn't the case. And George's like, what the hell are you guys doing? Right? So that was George, by the way, is the CEO of the company at this time. Systemize onboarding and program delivery. So what we want to do is have a systematic way and a structured game board here to onboard clients, and then go through it. And I'm using those words here, storyboarding process. We didn't think like that then. How are we going to help people onboard so that they can experience, get the best appreciation, so we can better manage their expectations and give them vocabulary, give our clients vocabulary about what their expectations are. So then, oh, by the way, I hope you can see this here. People, we want to be variable based on demand, what our people are. Look at what this title is, process. We want to use, we want to refine these particular processes here, and refine and constantly refine, continuous improvement. Technology, leverage existing, implement new was our headline. So we want to have program management dashboards. We want to be able to take advantage of rich media, new tools, etc. We want to be able to create other kinds of technologies to be able to make our process. So this is more, how do we make the research factory work? This would be, how do we make the delivery outputs more media rich? And then this would be, how do we manage the engagement process? So each one of these things require an architecture, and each one of these require an architecture with a different viewpoint. This is why I view Tim in this bucket, Conceptor is in this bucket, and everybody else is either in this bucket or that bucket. Okay, so hopefully you can see that we were still practicing the orb here, except not information. And I think one question I hope you guys would be curious as hell about is, why are we adding information to the orb? And I'll share that, based on my experience later. So here's sort of the vision of what we're trying to articulate. We're highlighting that we're managing. Our goal is to sell our service to the executives responsible for strategic accounts, industry accounts, geographic accounts, and inside sales. There are just four different executive types. And then, so we want to sell those executives. And really right now, what we've got is way too much focus on selling a project or funded at lower level altitude levels. So we're highlighting this is the gap that we're trying to do, and we're trying to build the service to be able to do that, which is really difficult because the engine that Forrester has was what I would consider very, in retrospect now, very productitis-y. So we're trying to build an engine that's more in service of Dave. And somebody like Dave's like, yeah, of course, this is really valuable. How come the rest of the company doesn't realize it? And he doesn't have any idea the internal force pressures we're fighting left and right internally across all of the different fractured sections at Forrester, but also within your own team on people just, going off sideways and doing their own thing, or getting paralyzed and not producing things, right? You have to always be producing something to make this work. Okay. So then what we did is we said, look, what we want to do is we're creating a structure on how we organize content. So really what we're highlighting is that there's a scope of research. So what we're trying to do here is, so Walter has brought up the 3 dimensions, the Z-axis and the like. So this is work from 2012 where we already did it. So it said, okay, this axis here is topics. This axis here is sort of scope. And then this axis here would be a deliverable type. So what we're trying to do here is just say, look, there's going to be one topic. And then within scope, we're going to label this, whatever the different scopes are. We're going to match an IP type to the scope. The scope would be client facing. The IP type would be what we build. And then how do we assign a value to it? So that was the scorecard that we tried to create. So what we said then is there's one topic, one scope, one IP type, which is really sort of the linear way we're doing it. By the way, Dave, if you think about this, this is sort of the scale that we want to be able to communicate with regards to app sales. So this is sort of the model that I have in mind. But basically what we're saying is like the number of outputs we can create if we think of one topic at a time and build that out, and then only have one scope and only one IP type point in time, we only get one output per effort. However, if we're concentrating on one topic that has 2 scopes, so we invest in the one topic in the research, but have 2 scopes of it, and then 2 IP types, that one work stream effort has a value of 4. But if we can do that time with, if we can handle 3 people doing it, each with 4 scopes and 4 IP types, the amount of outputs that we can generate is 48. So the volume of outputs that we can produce with this manufacturing process grows exponentially as you add topics in a structured way, scope of those in a structured way, and IP type. So this is sort of the mathematical justification. So bottom line is we're saying structure and precision across scope and IP types will exponentially expand our perceived value. So what does that look like? So we said, look, here are different stages of scope: problem and definition, problem visualization, business objects, approach visualization. We could just replace this with the 5 stages: gaining access, blah, 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 blah. And then over here, These would be subjects: value messaging, running sales enablement as a business within a business, scaling strategic accounts. In other words, pick themes that we want to take bets on, and then say this is sort of the scope, and then say, boom, here are the different output types. So if you do one work on scaling strategic accounts with the lens of problem and scope, we can make a static document. We can make an interactive document of this. We can create a tool. We can create a workbook. We can build a live presentation. We can have an inquiry for that one subject. We can do a working session for it. We can do a training session on it, or we can do custom delivery on it. And so each one of these would have their own associated set of intellectual property. And each one of these things have different monetization strategies, which we already figured out. That this model works so well. It's just that the challenge is getting the people on it. I learned that it was way easier to introduce this model to people who weren't subject matter experts, and then make them subject matter experts. Actually made them better subject matter experts than the people before, because the subject matter experts just are too locked into this model here, this linear approach. I got one topic, I'm gonna write one document in one format. So that's going, I'm gonna write about scaling strategic accounts. I'm gonna write this whole thing here, and then I'm gonna build this one thing here. These other things, that's too complicated. I'm just gonna do this and get it done. But you don't get any leverage from that. Okay, so then what we wanted to do is say, well, let's put some structure around, we're gonna need to develop vehicle types. So we want to create a library of skins of each of these things to provide inputs to. So some of the documents, boom, 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 are here, format documents. Here are workbook documents with a scope and a focus. There are presentation type documents, working session documents, etc. I'm going to pause here. So what we did is we created a representative example of each of these. And then what we wanted to do is, by working them through, our vision was, by having a spec or just a definition of these, by working on them in flight, we would flesh these out over time. That proved to be so challenging, just the resistance and the rigidity of, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Just overcoming that was really, really challenging. But where we're able to press forward with it, it worked really, really great. Making it accessible for other people who just resisted it because they either needed more context or more direction, or I don't get it, I don't get it. It all is based on doing. But it worked really well. Okay. So then what we wanted to do is give a view and say, look, what we want to do is we want to give some of these things identity. So anything that we do to identify content, identify need, we try to label these buckets. Everything on identify in that category is always free, and we make it available on blogs. And it was another requirement, is everybody had to blog, which of course some people did and some people didn't. Then we had, there's free and not free, was basically the categorization. And then underneath of that, each of one of these represents different packaged combos that they could buy the services from. So we had analyze class content and define class content. So if we were, in other words, how do we help you as a customer identify a problem? We make that available for free on the blog. How do we help you analyze that problem? Or how do we help you define that problem? Those are research reports that you buy. And then, we didn't really have great naming conventions here, but then other things like, what are other things that you would do with it? We'll have peer sessions, tools, experts, and events, workshops and advice, custom projects. So that's really how we laid this out. Okay, so then so that was the IP process. So now what we're zooming in is we're zooming in the client engagement process. So this is what we're doing. We always define it as a process. Since it's a process, when does it start and when does it stop? From pre-sale to structured engagement. So what we said is, look, these are the elements that we go in a discovery process. We want to be able to isolate the role that we're highlighting, match the problem to our inventory problem, figure out the peers that this role would need to communicate with. How do we scope? How do we take the problem and turn it into a scope? What is the perception of everybody associated with that, so we can provide a path? Then so this is what, in our discovery process, these are things that we had to check off, and we had some pretty good structure for that. This was how we qualified opportunities. Then we went in and said, let's have the client agree on what level that we want to do. And again, we don't want to show any of this. We want this to feel natural to the client. But we had a gold, silver, and bronze level packaging. And then how would we work together? Well, we have an onboarding, we envisioned an onboarding orientation with discipline, onboarding process, and then structured engagement. So this is why, going into Mimecast, by the way, you have to keep your interactions with me. Set up weekly calls, have to happen. And then, check off once a quarter whether we're meeting our program goals. Dave, this is the model, by the way, that we're going to be stealing to manage Pulse. All right, so these are your options: gold, silver, bronze. So what we're saying is, choose the level of involvement that you'd like Forrester to play and the level of investment. So if you want to drive it based on level of investment, then you got to recognize that the level of involvement Forrester will play will be low. So this was how we managed expectations. Now, because there was structure here, it required the analysts to go on and be on roll. And, unfortunately, they would just go off page and do whatever the fuck they wanted to do in a lot of cases. We had the most problem with analysts. The smarter the people, the harder off. The lower level people, the easier this was, and the better experience clients had. This is fascinating. But this axis level of involvement, this axis is level of investment. Bronze, you get inquiry calls, teleconferences, research documents, and then you can take advantage of peer sessions. In our silver level of investment, you get all of these things, plus you get coaching calls, which we defined. So we defined very concretely what a coaching call was. And then the gold session is you get all these, plus you get working sessions. So every one of these things had its own definition associated with it. So if you look at what the deliverables are, or what we would call entitlements, so this is how you turn on and off what value you get, or what are the things that you get with it. So all of them have Q&A experts. All of them have structured interactions with peers. You get one ticket. So the whole idea for bronze is that you're buying self-help. The whole idea for silver is you're buying focus coaching. And then for gold, you're buying dedicated planning support. This is how we broke it down. This is how we communicated and set expectations, with people. We're version and control the clients on that. And as you can see, there's different deliverables for each one. Okay, and then it's even more broken down, cleaner. So it was what would be client facing. So this is for us to show how we're getting leverage across the board, right? You build once and it cuts across. So look how much leverage there is here. So the reason that we did it this way versus the client facing view is that internally what we're highlighting is what's the incremental view. Anything in blue is stuff that Forrester already knows how to do. In order to execute silver, we just have to add these two deliverable types. In order to execute gold, these two deliverable types. But when we put it all together, because we designed it to be cohesive, 5 strategy sessions, 2 private workshops that pick on this and pick up on that leverage this, because everything's architected, we're able to offer something that's really, really, really unique, that is all blended and cohesive and all fits together. So this is the value. This is what the value of being really structured in it. The issue is that a lot of people want to understand every fucking detail that there is before doing their individual part. And then this would be what would be client facing. So inquiry, peer service, blah, blah, blah. And we just made sure that this cross-referenced what our current pricing plan was, which wasn't simple. Okay, and then what would be a sample program management plan, which we call a work in progress. Another thing that we managed too, but leadership, it was difficult for individual people to do this, but we always work backwards from quarterly goals and said, look, we knew what the key dates were. Look, our conference, our Sales Enablement Forum conference is in March. By the way, this was the conference, the Hero Conference. So this was the second one. So this is the one that Brian was a speaker at. So you can talk to him about what his experience was, and that Dave was a participant in. You could talk to him about what his experience was. I had all of this stuff that built out before all of that. And I didn't share that. We had to be careful about who we shared this to, because the nature of what people would do is, overthink, and get paralyzed by all the overthinking. So that's what it is. Hopefully you can see. What I'd love is a video back is, number one, why did I send this out right now? Number two, what are parallels that you see and what are parallels that you don't see? And then number three, what are some ideas that you can share to bring it forward? What could we make that looks something like this, build on top of this concept, so that we can better execute at Mimecast, and also retrofit and say, this is what we did at Acuvia. Thank you very much. I look forward to getting your feedback.